Hello and welcome to Bread and Thread, a podcast about food and domestic history. I'm Liz.
And I'm Hazel. We are two friends who studied archaeology together and love history and making stuff. So, what have you been making recently? This is the part where we talk about the making things.
I don't know why you clarified that, but yes, it is.
I don't know. I just thought if someone's listening to us for the first time, maybe they're confused as to why we're just starting a history podcast by talking about cake.
I've not made cake.
Good.
I did make Welsh Rarebit for the first time in like 7 years, though.
Oh, yum.
With some of the homemade beer.
Oh man. Oh, you're so cottagecore.
I'm gonna talk about Welsh Rarebit in the local Larder, but this one was very good.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Like, if the beer portion is bitter, it like contrasts really well with like the sort of sweet sharpness of cheese, and it's very good.
You sound like you're having like a transcendent experience.
I haven't had it for 7 years.
That is
fair enough. My father's.
Dish of my people.
I mean, literally, my father's father. What have you been up to?
I just kind of working on different projects, really reading up a lot about dyes and things, because I'd quite like to get into doing that. I've been processing the sheep's fleece that I have in a giant bag in my room, so that's finally getting done. I've been doing a lot of carding and spinning.
Nice.
So yeah, it's only been like a year, but I'm finally getting to it. I hope I have enough. Yeah. Yeah, there's a fair amount happening right now. So hopefully I'll have enough for the coat that I wanted to make. Yeah. So just kind of continuing with a few long-term projects, really. I haven't dipped into anything new. I did make chocolate and lime cupcakes, and they were delicious.
Chocolate and lime is... It's underrated as a combination, I think.
Great flavor combination, right? Because I feel like lime is a very strong flavor, and the chocolate kind of tempers it.
Yeah, the old-fashioned sweet shop near us does chocolate limes, which are kind of like like chocolate eclairs, where it's like chocolate and then the toffee outside.
Yeah.
It's like that, but instead of toffee, it's like a lime boiled sweet.
Oh man. That sounds like a time.
It's very good.
Yeah, lime is tasty. So, I did actually I wanted to get you to guess my topic for today's episode. I just thought it would be fun. So I'm going to give you some clues. This episode is going to be about a color. It is going to be about arguably the most expensive color in history. I was looking at the facts. Okay, do you want to do that bit again? Okay. So this episode is going to be about a color, and possibly the most expensive color in history. Very associated with ancient Greece and Rome. And this color is directly responsible for the decimation of a particular species of Mediterranean snail.
Okay, I know what it is.
Go on.
It's my favorite color.
Really?
Have you not seen my hair in the past like 5 years?
Oh, I mean, yeah, definitely. But okay, so go tell the peeps.
Is it indigo?
It's actually not indigo. It is Tyrian Purple,
Oh,
which I feel is probably what you were thinking of.
I knew it was. I knew it was a purple.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess you can get similar colors to indigo, but this one, there is a particular
It's like
reason.
a deep, rich purple.
Yeah. Like there is a reason why this color was so expensive. So that, like basically you could only afford it if you are royalty.
Mhm.
And that is because of the way it was made, because of the material it comes from, and also because it is a very particular shade of purple. So I think it's probably fairly generally known that purple is like an imperial color.
Yeah, like ancient Roman sumptuary laws.
Yeah. Like purple being restricted to like imperial use, or to officials like being able to have strips of purple on their robes. So I feel like a lot of people would think of ancient Rome and like Roman emperors when they're thinking of the color purple. But actually, there's kind of a reason why this purple in particular, like Tyrian or Imperial purple, was the Imperial one. So I've been doing quite a lot of reading up on natural dyes over the past few weeks. And turns out there are a few plants that you can get purple from. You can get it from logwood, which is a tree that grows in Asia. You can get it from, a few different other plants. But in Europe, the trade routes for these kind of dyes hadn't really been established yet. So, like, we didn't really know about them. Plus, the other dyes, so you can use berries like elderberries or blackberries or,
Mhm.
other kinds of things to get a purple. But the thing about Tyrion Purple is it's a lot more color fast and light fast. Like it doesn't fade with age. In fact, it apparently gets even richer and brighter.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why it was so prized. Like it was this really deep color. It's actually kind of more of a deep magenta color than
Yeah,
like
it's a very red purple.
yeah. So you can get some of the other kind of blue tone purples from mixing other dyes as well, or from over dyeing. But you cannot get this dark red purple color from anything else. And you can't get a purple this color and light fast as well.
Think of the color of like super synthetic, like grape flavored stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it's Ribena color. Oh no, what am I thinking of? That like Vimto. Hey.
Yeah, I would say Vimto's more the blue purple end.
Okay.
Like it's very hard to think of something natural that's that exact purple, and I suppose that's
Okay.
kind of the point.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I probably go with more Ribena. Actually, I feel like that's
Yeah, Ribena's
yeah.
a little bit more fake looking.
No shade to Ribena. I love that stuff.
Oh, yeah, but also like yeah, I do think the closest is like the packaging of something like grape flavored is the color of Tyrion purple.
So as we're establishing, it's a really hard to pin down color, which is why this specific shade was so prized, right? And it's called Tyrian Purple because one of the centers of manufacture was the city of Tyre. I think it's pronounced Tyre.
Is that TYR?
Tyre.
Oh, like a tire.
Yeah, like Tyre. Which is in modern day Lebanon, which at the time was Phoenicia. And interestingly, Phoenicia is the Greek name for the Lebanon area, and it's possible that the name Phoenicia means land of purple, because that's where the Greeks were getting this dye from.
That's a really pretty name then.
I know, right?
It just makes
Maybe.
me think of alphabets, but I know that it's the other way around. Like the alphabet is named after the concept of phonetics, which is Phoenicia. But that's a different podcast.
we do throw off a lot of tangential ideas on this podcast.
We just like history.
Yeah, it turns out there's a lot of it, and it all interconnects.
Defense.
Yeah. So Phoenicia was the center of this purple dye industry in the ancient world, and they kind of had outposts across North Africa where this was being produced as well. So the purple dye comes from a particular kind of sea snail that lives in the Mediterranean, called the murex snail. And there are at least 3 species of this snail that all produce various different shades, kind of from magenta to like a dark purple, and also to like a red. One of them is like Tyrian red.
Interesting.
Which was also super expensive. Yeah, so this was highly prized in the ancient world. Charlemagne was buried in a shroud made from Tyrion Purple.
Of course he was.
Of course.
On ground for Charlie.
Charlie. So, although that was in the 9th century, I believe, so kind of somewhat after ancient Greece and Rome, the manufacture of this dye goes back to probably before 1000 BC. What we have found as the evidence of this is like a lot of the crushed snail shells along the coastal areas of the Mediterranean. But the earliest evidence we have for the actual dye itself on material was actually discovered this year.
Wait, as in this year, do you mean like...
Okay, so this article that I got this from was published on the 28th of January 2021. And it's the discovery of researchers in Israel having found some fragments of wool fibers in Israel dating back to about 1000 BC. So fragments of wool dyed with Tyrion Purple, which is incredible. Like, I didn't expect for like this much of a recent development in the case of Tyrion Purple.
Wow.
I know, and I believe this is like the actual wool they found, and it's still purple. It's still like recognizably purple. Like, it's incredible. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. It's possible that it's an ancient process, and it went on pretty much until the fall of Constantinople. That's when you see it getting kind of popular in ancient Greece and then ancient Rome. And then the Byzantine Empire preserved the technique of dyeing with the murex snail. But then after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, so with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, no one really had the money or like could be bothered to continue making Tyrion Purple. And that is because as well as it being a horrifically expensive dye, And as we were saying, so expensive that you could only afford it if you were insanely wealthy, basically imperial. That being because you needed so many of these snails to make the dye. The dye comes from within the shellfish. And so you have to catch thousands of these shellfish, and then you have to extract the dye. Now, there are two ways you can do this. The first way, which is not the way they did it in ancient Greece and Rome most of the time, is a much kinder way. So the first way is that you basically annoy them into giving up the dye.
Is it like a Squid Ink situation?
Yeah, basically. So they're predatory sea snails, and among other things, this gland where the substance that has the dye in it is used for like squirting at things in like predatory behavior. So if they get agitated or like angry, they'll squirt out the dye. You can go and bother some snails. there is still milking snails in Oaxaca in Mexico. And there's an amazing Mexican documentary on this on YouTube. It's got English subtitles that I found, which is this guy basically explaining how they do it. And they go out onto the rocks and they find these snails. And it's a different species of snail. So it's not the same one that's in the Mediterranean, but it has the purple dye. So they go out onto the rocks and they have to like camp there because it takes so long, believe, to like milk all the snails. Get the snail. They milk it. So like they kind of just like
professional snail bother.
Squeeze the snail until it squirts out the dye, and they put it straight onto the yarn that they're dyeing.
Amazing.
And then they just put it back and go find some more snails. And apparently it takes like 28 days for them to like regain, like remake the dye, like refill their glands, as it were. And then yeah. And then they can be like harvested again. So it's a method that doesn't harm the snail and therefore doesn't deplete the populations. But as you might expect, you cannot produce a lot of dyed material with this. Like the guy in this documentary was saying that even in its heyday, when the populations of the snail were still really good, they would do like maybe 5 or 6 skeins of yarn in each trip, of like a week's camping or something. So yeah, it's like they're not really making it to sell. It's more like a traditional practice. And in fact, in this documentary, there are some amazing shots of backstrap weaving with some of this purple yarn. So I'll post a link to that actually when we put the episode up. So that's the first way. The second way, which is the one that they used in the industrial production of this dye, is that you collect all these thousands of shellfish, then you crush them, and you leave them to ferment.
Less nice.
Yeah. Apparently, it smells atrocious.
It would.
Like, awful. Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like people, well, you'd think people might be a bit more used to strong smells back in history, but like apparently even people at the time were like, no, this is rank. We do not want to be around this.
I guess they were already making garum. It's like, what's one more barrel of fermenting fish?
Yeah. So the way that Pliny the Elder describes it, I said it right. I remembered. So the process that Pliny the Elder describes is that they like crush the shells, and then they take the vein. There's like, they find the gland that has the dye, and they extract it, and then they like salt it, leave it to steep, boil it, and then there's like a funnel involved. They have to skim the liquor. Takes about 10 days, and then you can dye it. That's the process that he describes.
Okay.
Yeah. But then archaeological data also indicates that they were left to decompose, to like ferment. So we can't actually reproduce this method. Like, no one has managed to be able to do it to this day. We don't know exactly how they did it.
So you said that it kind of stopped after the fall of Constantinople.
Mm-hmm.
Was that because like it was too depleted by that point, or did the Ottomans just look at it and go, "We're not going to do that"?
Basically, yes, on both counts. Like, as you might expect, this absolutely decimated the Murex population of the Mediterranean. So by this point, like, even to this day, the snail is extremely rare in the Mediterranean. So they kind of ruined it.
Yeah.
They kind of used all the snail, which is one
I guess
reason.
the Ottomans could trade with Asia, couldn't they? Like, they had their own sources of purple.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's another reason. So it was basically that after the fall of Constantinople, so the Byzantines were doing this, you know, as a tradition, going back to ancient Rome. But it was falling out of favor elsewhere because it was just so expensive, like ridiculously expensive. Because of it took about 10,000 of these snails just to make enough dye for trimming your clothing.
Presumably getting more and more expensive as time goes on as well.
Well, yeah, because of
running out of snail.
Running out of snails, yeah. So by this point, like by 1453, like, it's getting more and more difficult to even find the snails. Like, no one's really got the money anymore. No one can be bothered with this, basically. Like, there's no point. And so purple kind of goes out of history for a bit after that, at least in the kind of European / Middle Eastern world, until the importation of purples from Asia, which is like a couple of centuries later.
Yeah, that'd be more Silk Road stuff, presumably.
Yeah, until you can get access to things like logwood, which can give you bright, colour-fast purples. And in fact, the medieval Western world kind of moves on to, okay, again, I'm not sure how this is pronounced, but Kermes?
Type it out.
Kermes.
I think it's just Kermis.
Kermes, okay, also known as vermilion or scarlet. So that particular scarlet red, which was a hallmark of wealth in the medieval world, that kind of takes over as the fancy colour, which I believe is also why cardinals wear red in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, because Catholic priests like their fancy clothes.
Indeed. Yeah. So that's kind of the reason it died out. And as I mentioned, the only place they really make this today is in Mexico. And as a very small scale thing. So it's just absolutely wild. Like, the whole entire concept of this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then, it's just interesting that it really is a completely unreproducible shade. Like, it's the only way you can get this particular color. So I guess it makes sense that people would do this, but yeah. I mean, we know they were doing it in these massive quantities because we found the remains of the industry, like the discarded shells. Which, so for example, at Sidon, which is another Phoenician city, there's just the quantity of discarded shells created a mountain like 40 meters high. Like,
wow.
This dye was worth more than its weight in gold.
That's a legitimate hill.
Yeah. Like, that's the scale of this industry. Like, it was big. So even though this was a luxury good and there was very little of it around, it required this massive industry to sustain it. So, that, like, when you don't have emperors with massive amounts of personal wealth as well as like a lot of taxpayers' money, like no one can afford this anymore. Yeah. So that is the relatively brief but extremely wild history of the color Tyrian Purple.
That is indeed extremely wild.
There is a lot more to this than meets the eye. And going a bit more onto, I suppose, a subject more relevant to us today, it's kind of an example of how I think we, going forward, need to kind of blend these older ways of making things with the technology we have today. Because when you think about, the demand we have today for clothing and the like amount of people there are, if we were to go back to using completely natural dyes, that would have a terrible effect on the environment, because natural dyes need a lot of quantity of material compared to the thing you're actually going to dye. I mean, most of them are not as significant as the Tyrian Purple, but you still need generally about twice the amount of dye stuff to the material that you're going to dye. So, and in the past, this did have an effect on the environment. Like, this snail is almost extinct today because of the demand for this dye. Even 2,000 years ago. So, yeah. Although the process of natural dyeing itself, like the process, is much more environmentally friendly than the process of creating most synthetic dyes, the actual dye stuff itself, like, that can be difficult to obtain, or like it could be harmful to the environment if we were to harvest a lot of it.
Yeah, I guess what you really need is like an end to fast fashion and developing more environmentally friendly synthetic dyes at the same time and as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Like, I think probably the way forward is like definitely the process of synthetic dyeing needs to become a lot more environmentally friendly. And I definitely think that there's a lot of things from natural dyeing that we can incorporate into those processes. So I don't know. I think perhaps going forward, the way might be to figure out figure out how we can use like waste products as dyes, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like most things, I think it's a combination of the old stuff and the new stuff.
What?
Surprise! It's compromise again.
So before we go on to local larder, if you want to suggest an episode or just say hi, we do have an email, breadandthreadpodcast@gmail.com.
We also have a Twitter @breadandthread, so you can keep up with all the exciting things on there and take part in like the guess what the episode is game that we play every couple of weeks.
So on Patreon @breadandthread, if you want monthly recipes and access to a Discord server, and potentially at the $10 tier, us to make you your very own bonus episode.
I'm Mod Paper from Probably Bad RPG Ideas, and we have a podcast. If you'd like to hear RPG advice on how to use assorted incredibly bad ideas as actual ideas in an actual game, then listen to the Probably Bad podcast. Available on pretty much every podcatcher. And remember to have a probably bad day.
So, tell us about some Rarebit.
Yes. So the exact origin, unsurprisingly, is kind of unclear. It's thought to be a corruption of Welsh rabbit, which is first recorded in 1725. But we get Rarebit by the 1780s. There's a writer, mostly an antiquarian, but sort of one of those people that does a bit of everything, called Francis Gross, who refers to it as Welsh rabbit and Welsh rarebit, 2 words in that case. But it's generally agreed that rarebit is a corruption of rabbit.
Okay, but
which is probably insulting the Welsh.
Okay, I was gonna say because oh, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say because as far as I know, there's no actual rabbit involved.
Oh no, it's a vegetarian dish. The general consensus seems to be that it's that Welsh people are either they're poor or stupid, so they make cheese on toast and call it rabbit. Because people were really mean to Welsh people.
Yeah, that is kind
English people.
That is kind of a theme.
Mean to Welsh people. So Welsh rarebit itself is generally leeks, cheese, beer, mustard, melt it all together and pour it over toast.
And it is delicious.
Yeah, there's no way to go wrong with that. Top tip, actually, there's a Welsh cheese called Aveni, which is Y_FENNI, which has ale and mustard already in it. So if you want to make a rarebit just really, really easily, get that.
Oh, I've had that actually. We got some on my birthday and it is amazing. Would recommend. Like, go get yourself some. It's delicious.
Yeah. But the dish itself probably developed from a much earlier thing. We don't know how early, but probably medieval, called caws pobby, which is Welsh for baked cheese. Where you basically put the cheese up near the fire and the top of it melts, and you scoop that off and put it on bread that you've also toasted over the fire with a toasting fork.
Oh, wow. It's like extreme cheese toast.
It's almost like a Welsh fondue.
Oh, man. That's amazing.
Which it's interesting because you need quite a hard cheese for that, and a lot of Welsh cheeses are quite soft.
Okay.
But there's some Tudor accounts of a hard ewe milk cheese being used.
Ooh.
Which I can imagine that being particularly good, actually, because ewe milk cheese tends to be a little bit nutty. Not that I eat inordinate amounts of cheese or anything.
I like the idea that like people all throughout history have just been like, yep, toasted cheese, good.
Well, there is something in the stereotype that I mentioned of Wales being poor, especially at that point, because England likes to just go into Wales and attack people and take all the good stuff. So a lot of Welsh people were very poor, especially peasants who are poor everywhere. So something like that would be, especially if you can mix some seasonings in there with the rarebit, would just be a really nice, comforting dish after a hard day. Like you're out, you're working in, on the hills with your sheep or whatever, and then you go back into your little house and you get some hot cheese and some hot bread and you put them together and you just sit there and you eat it and everything's okay for a little bit.
Hot melty cheese. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's references from the late 18th century of it becoming a tavern meal, like a thing that you would just wander into a pub and order.
It sounds like good pub food, actually. Like it's fairly simple to make and it goes good with beer.
I mean, like I said, if you make it right, it's got beer in it. So interestingly, it gets referred to at various points and in various places as English, Irish, or Scotch rabbit, as well as Welsh. But the referring to it as Welsh seems to come first.
Okay.
There is also a variation called buck rarebit or golden buck, which is when it's served with an egg.
That's interesting.
Which just sounds like a really good breakfast. Yeah, and apparently you can get in some places, especially places in the US with a large Welsh background, so places like Appalachia and parts of Pennsylvania that have a lot of Welsh ancestry. You can get rarebit sauce or rabbit sauce on a hamburger in some places.
Oh, wow. Wow, that is a whole new dimension. I feel like that would be quite good.
Yeah, because the problem with queso, like the American cheese sauce, I think is that it's very it doesn't have a lot of depth of flavor to it.
Okay.
You know, the sort of the bright yellow Tex-Mex cheese sauce.
I think I know what you mean. I don't think I've ever had it, but like I watch movies.
Yeah. But I think I think having it with Rarebit would be really good, and I'm gonna have to try that at some point. So yeah, there's not a lot of information about Welsh Rarebit. That's basically all of the information that I could find about it. Apart from that it is mentioned in it's mentioned in a Tudor era joke book. So it's one of the sort of I've forgotten the name. It's kind of a Shaggy Dog story about God getting sick of there being so many Welsh people in heaven, because God's mean, I guess. And tells St. Peter to do something about it. And St. Peter goes outside the gates of heaven and says, "How's Pobby? 'Tis much to say as roasted cheese." And all the Welsh people run out because they want some rarebit, and then St. Peter locks them out of heaven. So there's that.
Okay. Well, I think I'd pick Rarebit over Heaven, to be honest. I mean, it's basically the same thing, right?
Yeah, it really is, though. That is pretty much all of the information that I could find about Welsh Rarebit.
That is fantastic. I love the Rarebit burger idea. Oh.
So yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next time. I think I will do sumptuary laws next, since I brought them up, and now I realise that a lot of people probably don't know what that is.
That is a great idea. I feel like we'll have a good segue for once.
Yeah. The segue will be listen to the last one and then this one. So yeah, we will be back in a couple of weeks and I will tell you all about sumptuary laws. Goodbye.